The wind didn't knock on Gideon Hale's door. It hammered. It came howling down from the mountains every winter, turning Iron Ridge Ranch into a fortress of frozen earth and bitter air, and Gideon had long ago stopped pretending he minded. The cold suited him. It kept people at a distance, exactly where he wanted them. On that December morning in 1882, he stood at the window of his study with his arms crossed, watching the latest carriage struggle up the snow-choked road toward his gate. The third one this month. He didn't need to see the passengers to know what they wanted. They all wanted the same thing. "Sir?" came a voice from the doorway. Gideon didn't turn. "Tell them I'm not receiving visitors, Cormac." His foreman, a grizzled man with a face like cracked leather, shifted his weight. "They've come a long way. The Havertons, from back east, brought their daughter. Then they wasted their time and their daughters." Gideon's voice was flat. Same answer as always. Cormac hesitated, which meant he had more to say. Gideon waited. "People are starting to talk, Mr. Hale, saying you're—" Cormac trailed off, searching for a diplomatic word. "Cold? Heartless? A bastard?" Gideon finally turned from the window. At 42, he still carried the build of a man who'd worked cattle and broken horses before money made labor optional. His face was all hard angles, weathered by years of frontier sun and wind, with eyes the color of winter sky, pale, sharp, revealing nothing. "Let them talk. I pay you to manage my ranch, not my reputation." "Yes, sir." Cormac left. Gideon returned to his vigil at the window. The carriage had stopped at the gate. He watched a young woman emerge, pale blue dress completely wrong for Montana winter, her father gesturing toward the house with obvious frustration. The girl looked miserable. They always did. He'd been through this routine so many times he could script it. The parents would push forward, all smiles and careful compliments about his impressive enterprise. The daughters would simper or sulk, depending on whether they'd been told about his reputation beforehand. Someone would mention what a fine match it would be, how advantageous for both families. Then Gideon would say no, and they'd leave angry, calling him every name their breeding would allow. The game exhausted him. But it was simpler than the alternative, letting someone close enough to prove, once again, that people couldn't be trusted when money entered the equation. He'd learned that lesson thoroughly enough. Once was sufficient. Through the frosted glass, he watched the Havertons give up. The carriage turned around, wheels cutting deep ruts in the snow. Another rejection for the collection. Gideon moved away from the window and sat behind his desk, surrounded by leather-bound ledgers and maps of his property. 2,000 acres. 500 head of cattle. The largest operation in 3 counties, built from nothing through 15 years of brutal work and ruthless business sense. Everything he'd wanted to prove, that he didn't need anyone, that he could succeed alone, sat documented in neat columns of figures. It felt like ash in his mouth. He opened the top ledger mechanically, trying to focus on numbers. Cattle inventory, feed costs, projected spring sales. The work that used to consume him now felt like going through motions, filling hours between dawn and dark. "Mr. Hale?" Cormac was back, and this time he sounded uncertain. "There's someone else at the gate." Gideon's jaw tightened. If the Havertons sent their daughter back alone, thinking, "No, sir. Different person entirely. A woman, but she's not—" Cormac struggled. "She's not like the others." "Then tell her what you told the others." "I tried. She won't leave." Gideon looked up sharply. "Won't?" "Says she'll wait until you agree to speak with her. She's been standing there 10 minutes already. Horse looks about done in, and she's not dressed for this weather, but she's just standing there." Something in Cormac's tone made Gideon rise. Not irritation, confusion. In 15 years, his foreman had never sounded confused about how to handle someone at the gate. "Show me." They walked through the house Gideon had built too large for one person, rooms he'd furnished and never used, halls that echoed with his solitary footsteps. At the front entrance, he grabbed his coat and stepped into the cutting wind. The cold hit like a fist. December in Montana didn't ease into winter. It seized the land by the throat and held on until spring. Gideon had spent enough winters here to know this one was meaner than most. At the gate, maybe 50 yards from the house, a figure stood beside a horse that looked ready to collapse. Not a carriage, not a fine dress, Just a woman in a dark coat that had seen better years standing motionless in the falling snow. Gideon walked toward her, boots crunching on frozen ground. As he got closer, details emerged. Mid-30s, maybe. Dark hair pulled back severe enough to hurt. Face pale from cold but composed. She wasn't shivering, which meant she either had remarkable self-control or was already too far gone from exposure to feel it. "Gates closed," Gideon said when he was 10 feet away. "I noticed." Her voice was steady, not flirtatious, not coy, just factual. "Then you should leave before your horse dies and you follow it." "I will, after you hear what I came to say." Gideon stopped. Up close he could see more. This woman wasn't soft. There were lines around her eyes, the kind that came from squinting into too many hard years. Her coat was patched in 3 places. Her gloves had been mended so many times the original leather was barely visible. "You're not from one of the wealthy families," he said. "No. You're not here to offer your hand in marriage for a piece of my fortune." "No." "Then what the hell are you doing at my gate in a snowstorm?" She met his eyes directly. "I came to talk." "About what?" "About why you're so determined to die alone in this house when you clearly hate every minute of it." The words hit like a slap. Gideon felt his face go hard. "You don't know anything about me. I know you send everyone away. I know you've convinced yourself that's strength instead of cowardice." She shifted her weight slightly. The horse beside her snorted, breath steaming. "I know because I did the same thing for years. It doesn't work. Get off my property." "No." Gideon stared at her. People didn't refuse him, not here, not on land he owned with power he'd built. "I'll have you removed." "By Cormac?" She glanced past him toward where his foreman stood watching. "He looks too decent to drag a woman through the snow. You could do it yourself, but I don't think you will." "You're testing my patience. I'm trying to have a conversation. If you tell me to leave after that, I'll go." The wind gusted hard enough to rock them both. Snow was accumulating fast now, already past ankle deep. Gideon knew he should turn around and walk away, let her stand there until sense or frostbite drove her off. Instead, he heard himself ask, "What's your name?" "Elena Mercer." "Where are you from?" "Does it matter?" "If you're going to freeze to death on my property, I'd like to know where to send the body." The corner of her mouth moved, not quite a smile, but something adjacent to it. "Fair enough. I came from a homestead 70 miles south. Used to be my husband's. He died 2 years ago. Claim went to his brother, and I've been working where I can since then." "Doing what?" "Whatever pays, laundry, cooking, field work during planting season." She said it without shame, just fact. "Last job ended when the ranch sold. I heard about you. Everyone's heard about me. They said you were wealthy, cruel, and impossible to impress. They said you'd rejected every marriage prospect in Montana and made enemies of half the territory doing it." Elena paused. "They also said you looked like the loneliest man alive." Gideon felt something crack in his chest. Anger, maybe. Or something worse, recognition. "You came here to psychoanalyze me? That's your play?" "I came here because I recognized the description. I've been that lonely. I know what it looks like when someone builds walls so high they forget why they built them." Elena's voice stayed level, but there was something raw underneath it. "I'm not here to fix you or save you or marry you for your money. I'm here because I thought maybe if I could talk to someone who understood what it's like to stop believing in anything good, I'd feel less crazy." The honest simplicity of it stopped him cold. This woman wasn't performing, wasn't angling. She'd ridden 70 miles through the worst winter in years to stand at his gate and admit she was lonely. Gideon didn't trust it, couldn't trust it. Trust was a door he'd nailed shut years ago, but something in her eyes made him hesitate. "Your horse needs shelter," he finally said. "Bring it to the barn. We'll talk inside where it's warm. 15 minutes, then you leave." Elena nodded once. 15 minutes. The house unsettled her. Elena had seen wealth before, back when she'd been young and stupid enough to believe it mattered. But this was different. Gideon Hale's home wasn't showy. It was substantial. Heavy furniture built to last. Thick rugs over hardwood floors. Everything quality, nothing ornamental. And emptier than a church on Monday. She sat in his study while he poured coffee from a pot that had been keeping warm on a small iron stove in the corner. The room smelled like leather and wood smoke. One wall was entirely windows looking out at the storm. The others were lined with bookshelves, half empty. Gideon handed her a cup without ceremony and sat across from her, maintaining distance. 15 minutes, he repeated. Talk. Elena wrapped her hands around the warm ceramic, letting feeling return to her fingers. Now that she was inside, the cold she'd been ignoring crashed over her. She felt herself shake. You're half frozen, Gideon said, frowning. I'm fine. You're not. He stood, pulled a heavy blanket from a chest near the window, and tossed it to her. Not gently, but not cruelly either, just efficient. If you collapse, Cormac will insist on calling a doctor, and that will be a whole production. Warm up. Elena pulled the blanket around her shoulders. It smelled like cedar and snow. Thank you. Gideon sat again, watching her with those pale, measuring eyes. Why did you really come here, Mrs. Mercer? Miss, I don't use his name anymore. Why did you come? Elena drank the coffee. It was stronger than she expected, bitter and scalding. Perfect. I told you, I was lonely. That's not enough reason to ride 70 miles in December, isn't it? No. Gideon leaned back in his chair. Plenty of lonely people in Montana. You could have talked to any of them. Why specifically seek out the man everyone calls cold-hearted? Elena met his gaze. Because the people who aren't lonely don't understand. They tell you to try harder, smile more, get over it. They think loneliness is a choice, something you can fix by just deciding to be different. She paused. I needed to talk to someone who knew it's not that simple. Someone who knew what it's like when people only see what they want from you, never what you are. Something shifted in Gideon's expression. Not softening exactly. He didn't seem like a man who softened, but a slight easing of the rigid control. How long were you married? He asked. 7 years. That's a long time. Long enough to learn I'd made a terrible mistake. Elena's voice stayed level, but her hands tightened on the cup. Daniel was the kind of man who seemed good until you belonged to him. Then all the charm disappeared. I spent 7 years trying to be small enough that he wouldn't notice me, quiet enough that he wouldn't get angry. It didn't work. He noticed everything, and he was always angry. He hit you. It wasn't a question. Elena wondered what her face showed that made it obvious. Yes. Why didn't you leave? Where would I go? Montana's not kind to women alone. I had no money, no family. The law doesn't care much about a man disciplining his wife. She said the word disciplining like it tasted rotten. So I stayed. I survived. And when he died, kicked by a horse while drunk, I pretended to mourn long enough to be decent, then left the first chance I got. Gideon was quiet for a long moment. Then, you think I'll understand that because I'm cruel? No, I think you'll understand because you're not. Elena set down her cup. Cruel men enjoy other people's pain. You don't enjoy anything. You're just trying to control the only thing you think you can. Who gets close enough to hurt you? The words landed in the space between them like stones. You've known me 15 minutes, Gideon said coldly. You don't know a damn thing about what I am. You're right, I don't. Elena didn't look away. But I know what I saw at that gate. A man who could have had Cormac drag me off or ignored me entirely. Instead, you came yourself. You brought me inside. You gave me a blanket when I was shaking. She paused. You're not as heartless as you want people to believe. Maybe I'm just too tired to fight today. Maybe. Or maybe you're exactly as lonely as everyone says, and you hate it as much as I do. Gideon stood abruptly. Your 15 minutes are up. Elena didn't move. Do you want me to leave? Yes. That's not what I asked. I asked if you want me to leave. The question hung in the air between them. Outside, the wind rattled the windows. The fire in the stove crackled. Somewhere in the house, a clock ticked. Gideon stood with his back to her, staring out at the storm. Elena waited. She'd learned patience the hard way, through years of reading moods and measuring silences. She could wait a little longer. Finally, he turned. What do you want from me, Elena? The use of her first name felt significant, though she couldn't say why. Nothing you're not willing to give, she said quietly. I just wanted to have one honest conversation with someone who might understand, that's all. And then what? Then I leave. I'll find work somewhere else. Keep moving. Same as I've been doing. In this storm, I've ridden through worse. That's not an answer to what I asked. Elena frowned. What did you ask? If you leave today, where will you go? Tonight, specifically. She hadn't thought that far ahead. There's a town about 20 miles west. I'll try there. You won't make it before dark. Not in this weather? Not with your horse already exhausted. Gideon's voice was matter-of-fact. No emotion behind it. You'll freeze. I'll manage. No, you won't. He crossed his arms. Stay tonight. Leave in the morning when the storm breaks. Elena stared at him. Why would you offer that? Because I'm not a monster, whatever people say. And because I'm not going to have your death on my conscience. He said it like the decision irritated him. There are guest rooms on the second floor. Pick one. Cormac's wife can bring you supper. You leave at first light. It was the most reluctant act of kindness Elena had ever received. Thank you, she said. Gideon nodded once, curtly, and walked out. D. Elena didn't see him again that evening. Cormac's wife, a sturdy woman named Margaret, who looked like she could wrestle a steer and win, showed her to a room upstairs, brought her hot stew and bread, and asked no questions. The room was simple but clean. A bed with a thick quilt, a dresser, a window looking out at endless white. Elena ate slowly, savoring food she hadn't had to cook herself. Then she stood at the window, watching snow fall into darkness. She'd told Gideon the truth, mostly. She had been lonely, desperately, achingly lonely, in the way that comes from being surrounded by people who treat you like furniture, present, functional, but not quite human. But she hadn't told him everything. She hadn't told him that the last job she'd lost was because the rancher's son had tried to corner her in the barn, and when she'd fought him off, his father called her a liar and threw her out without pay. She hadn't told him that she'd spent the last of her money on the horse, gambling everything on this desperate ride north, because she'd heard about a man who turned everyone away and thought maybe, someone that determined to be alone might understand what it was like to have no safe place to rest. She'd come here with no plan except to stop running for a few minutes. She hadn't expected Gideon Hale to be anything more than his reputation. Cold, harsh, unreachable. But then he'd looked at her with those winter sky eyes and asked questions like he actually wanted to hear the answers. Then he'd wrapped a blanket around her shaking shoulders and offered her shelter without asking for anything in return. It scared her how much that small kindness had cracked something open inside her chest. Elena pressed her hand against the cold window glass. Tomorrow she'd leave. She'd keep the promise she'd made. One night, then gone. But tonight, just for tonight, she'd allow herself to stay somewhere warm. Gideon couldn't sleep. He lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the house settle around him. Usually he liked the quiet. Tonight it felt oppressive. Elena Mercer had been inside his home for 6 hours, and she'd already disrupted everything, not by doing anything. She'd gone to her room quietly, eaten what Margaret brought, and caused no trouble. But her presence filled the house anyway, made it feel different, less empty, less like a prison he'd built for himself. It unsettled him. Gideon didn't do unsettled. He did controlled, measured, predicted. He'd spent 15 years making himself impossible to surprise, and this woman had walked up to his gate and done it anyway. You're not as heartless as you want people to believe. How had she seen that? Everyone else looked at him and saw exactly what he wanted them to see. A man made of ice and money, untouchable. But Elena had looked past it in minutes, seen the raw wound underneath, and named it without flinching. It made him want to throw her out immediately. It made him want to ask her to stay. Both impulses felt equally dangerous. Gideon rolled onto his side, trying to force sleep. Tomorrow she'd leave, and everything would return to normal. He'd go back to running his ranch, turning away hopeful families, living in this house alone. The routine that had sustained him for years. The thought felt heavier than it should. He closed his eyes and tried not to think about the woman sleeping 2 doors down, or the way she'd stood in the snow refusing to leave, or the raw honesty in her voice when she'd admitted why she'd come, tried, and failed. Morning came gray and bitter. Gideon woke early out of habit, dressed, and went downstairs. Margaret was already in the kitchen, preparing breakfast. Mrs. Mercer still sleeping? He asked. No, sir. She's been up an hour. Fed her horse, checked all the tack herself. Margaret slid eggs onto a plate. That woman knows her way around a barn, helped bring in hay without being asked. Gideon frowned. She was supposed to rest. Don't think she's comfortable resting. Margaret gave him a long look. Don't think she's comfortable anywhere, truth be told. Woman's got the look of someone used to earning every breath. He knew the look. He'd worn it himself for years. Storm stopped? He asked. About an hour ago. Roads will be rough, but passable. Which meant Elena would leave. As planned. As agreed. Gideon took the plate of eggs Margaret offered and carried it to the dining room. He sat alone at a table built for 12, eating breakfast in silence, telling himself this was fine. Normal. Exactly what he wanted. Footsteps in the hall made him look up. Elena appeared in the doorway, already dressed in her mended coat, hair tied back severely. She looked like she was preparing for battle. I'm ready to leave, she said. Thank you for the shelter. Gideon set down his fork. You haven't eaten. I'll manage. Sit. Eat first. I don't want to impose. You're not. He gestured at the empty chair across from him. Sit. Elena hesitated, then moved to the chair. She sat stiffly, like someone unused to being at a proper table. Margaret appeared with another plate, set it down, and disappeared again. They ate in silence for several minutes. Then Gideon said, Where will you go? West. There's mining towns that way. Someone will need a cook or laundress. Mining towns are rough. Everywhere's rough. He couldn't argue with that. You have money? Enough to get there. And if you don't find work? I'll find work. Elena's voice was flat, certain. I always do. Gideon pushed eggs around his plate. This was none of his business. She'd come, they'd talked, she was leaving. The arrangement was concluded. But he heard himself say, What if you stayed? Elena's fork stopped halfway to her mouth. What? Stayed. Here. The words felt strange coming out, like a language he'd forgotten. Margaret could use help in the house. The work's steady, pays fair. You'd have your own room. She stared at him. Why would you offer that? Good question. Gideon didn't have a good answer. Because I hate waste, he said finally. You're competent, you work hard, and sending you back out into winter to maybe freeze or maybe get hired by some mining camp seems stupid. This solves a practical problem. For me. For both of us. Margaret's getting older. She complains about the housework. This helps her. Elena set down her fork carefully. Mr. Hale. Gideon. Mr. Hale, she repeated firmly. I appreciate the offer, but I don't take charity. It's not charity, it's employment. It's charity dressed up to look like employment, so I'll accept it. She wasn't wrong. Gideon felt irritation rise. Does it matter? You need work. I'm offering work. Why question it? Because in my experience, when men offer women work for reasons they can't explain, it ends badly. The words landed like a punch. Gideon realized how it must look. Wealthy man, woman alone, convenient job offer. His jaw tightened. I'm not your dead husband, he said quietly, and I'm not trying to trap you into anything. If you work here, you work here. Same as Cormac, same as Margaret, same as any other ranch hand. You do your job, I pay you. That's the arrangement. If I ever make you uncomfortable or unsafe, you leave. No argument, no consequences. Elena studied him. You mean that? I don't say things I don't mean. Some men do. I'm not some men. Gideon held her gaze. Look, you want to leave. Leave. I'm not stopping you. But if you're just riding out because you think you have to, because you don't believe someone would offer help without strings attached, then you're letting fear make your decision. And I thought you were braver than that. The challenge hung in the air. Elena's eyes narrowed. That's manipulation. That's honesty. There's a difference. Is there? Yes. Gideon leaned back in his chair. Manipulation would be telling you about how cold it is out there, how dangerous the roads are, how you'll probably die before you reach the next town. I'd make you feel guilty for leaving, scared of what might happen. I'd use your fear against you. He paused. I'm doing the opposite. I'm asking you to stop being afraid long enough to make a real choice. Elena was quiet for a long moment. Then, what if I stay and it's a mistake? Then you leave. Same as if you left now. It's not the same. If I leave now, I'm just moving on. If I stay and then leave, I'm running away again. There's a difference. Gideon understood that difference better than he wanted to admit. So what do you want to do? I don't know. Elena's voice was so quiet he almost missed it. I stopped knowing what I wanted years ago. I only know what I'm afraid of. What are you afraid of? She looked at him directly. That if I stay, I'll start hoping again. And hope is dangerous. The raw vulnerability in those words hit him square in the chest, because he understood. He'd stopped hoping too, years ago, and the absence of it had felt like safety. Maybe, Gideon said slowly, we're both too damn scared of the wrong things. Elena blinked. What do you mean? I mean, you're afraid of hope, and I'm afraid of people, and we're both so busy protecting ourselves from getting hurt that we've forgotten how to live. He stood up, suddenly restless. Stay or go, Elena, but make the choice based on what you want, not what you're afraid of. He walked out before she could respond. Unmount. Elena found him an hour later in the barn, checking on the horses. She'd spent that hour thinking, pacing her room, looking out at the white expanse of Montana winter, weighing fear against possibility. I'll stay, she said from the doorway. 3 months, trial period. If it's not working, I leave. No hard feelings. Gideon turned from the stall he'd been examining, snow from his coat scattered on the barn floor. 3 months. Agreed. And I pay my own way. Room and board comes out of my wages. That's stupid. Room and board is part of the wages. Then I'll do extra work to earn it. Gideon sighed. You're the most stubborn woman I've ever met. I've had to be. Elena stepped further into the barn. One more condition. There's more? If you start treating me like you treated those families who came courting, cold, dismissive, like I'm wasting your time, I leave immediately. I won't stay where I'm not wanted. Fair. Gideon moved to the next stall. Condition from my side. If you start treating this like anything other than employment, if you start trying to fix me or save me or whatever you think needs doing, you leave. I don't need saving. I wasn't planning to offer. Good. They stood there in the dim barn, two damaged people negotiating the terms of proximity. So we're agreed? Elena asked. We're agreed. Elena nodded, then, because she needed to hear it said plainly, Why are you really doing this, Gideon? He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, because when you said you came here to talk to someone who'd understand loneliness, I realized I hadn't had an honest conversation with another person in 15 years. And I didn't realize how much I missed it until you showed up at my gate and refused to leave. He looked at her. Maybe that makes me selfish. I don't know, but I'm tired of being alone in a house full of empty rooms. The confession hung between them, raw and undefended. I understand, Elena said quietly. Do you? Yes. She moved closer. I'm tired too. Tired of running, tired of being afraid, tired of small rooms in cheap boarding houses where nobody knows my name. I want... She trailed off, trying to find words. I want to stop for a while. Just stop. Gideon nodded slowly. Then stop here. 3 months. We'll see what happens. 3 months, that Elena echoed. They shook hands on it there in the barn, a formal agreement between two people who'd forgotten how to be informal with anyone. Her hand was rough from work, his from years of ranch labor. They held the grip a moment longer than necessary, then released. I should find Margaret, Elena said. Figure out what work needs doing. She'll put you through your paces. Margaret doesn't go easy on anyone. Good. I don't want easy. Gideon almost smiled. Not quite, but close. You're going to fit in here just fine. Elena left him in the barn, walking back toward the house through melting snow. The storm had passed. The sky was still gray, but lighter. Spring felt impossibly distant, but for the first time in months, Elena let herself think it might actually come. Behind her, Gideon stood in the barn doorway watching her go, telling himself this was a practical decision, nothing more. Help for Margaret. Another hand around the ranch. Simple employment. He was lying to himself and he knew it. But for now, the lie felt safer than the truth. The first day Elena Mercer stayed at Iron Ridge Ranch, Nothing dramatic happened. She worked. He worked. The sun set. They ate dinner at opposite ends of the long table, said goodnight, and went to separate rooms. But something had shifted, a hairline crack in the frozen surface of Gideon Hale's carefully controlled world. And in Montana winter, the smallest crack could change everything. The first week passed in a rhythm of careful distance. Elena woke before dawn, helped Margaret with breakfast, cleaned rooms that barely needed cleaning, and kept herself busy enough that she didn't have time to question her decision. Gideon ran his ranch with the same cold efficiency he always had. Up early, out late, conversation minimal. They existed in the same house like planets in separate orbits, aware of each other but never touching. It was exactly what they'd agreed to, nothing more. But the ranch hands noticed. Elena felt their eyes on her whenever she crossed the yard, heard the conversations that stopped when she approached. The looks weren't hostile exactly, just curious, assessing. She'd been through enough jobs to recognize the questions they weren't asking. Who was she? Why was she here? What did the boss see in a woman who showed up out of nowhere? She ignored it. She'd survived worse than gossip. On the 8th morning, she was hauling water from the well when one of the younger ranch hands, a kid named Thomas with more enthusiasm than sense, approached her. "Need help with that, Miss Elena?" "I've got it." "Must be heavy." "I said I've got it." She didn't snap, but her voice had an edge that made him step back. Thomas raised his hands. "Just trying to be friendly." "I don't need friendly. I need to work." She walked past him toward the kitchen, aware of his confusion trailing behind her. She felt bad for half a second, then reminded herself that friendly in her experience usually meant something else, and she'd learned to cut it off before it started. Margaret was at the stove when Elena came in. The older woman took one look at her face and shook her head. "You bit Thomas's head off." "He was in my way." "He was being polite." "He was testing boundaries." Elena set the water bucket down harder than necessary. "I've seen how this goes. First, it's help with water, then it's walking me back from the barn. Then it's a hand somewhere it shouldn't be, and everyone saying I let him on." Margaret turned fully from the stove. "That happened at your last job?" "Every job?" Elena grabbed a rag and started wiping down the already clean counter. "So I learned to shut it down early. Thomas isn't like that." "You don't know that." "I do. Been here 5 years, kid's harmless. Probably reminded of his sister back home, who he misses." Margaret's voice softened. "Not every man's your husband, Elena." The words hit harder than they should have. Elena stopped wiping. "I know that," she said quietly. "Do you?" Elena didn't answer, because the truth was, she didn't know. Not really. She'd spent 7 years learning that kindness could turn to cruelty in a heartbeat, and 2 years since then learning that trust was expensive. Unlearning those lessons wasn't as simple as deciding to. "I'll apologize to him," she said finally. Margaret nodded. "Good. Now go help Cormac in the barn. He's sorting tack and his back's acting up." Elena found Cormac exactly where Margaret said, moving slower than usual through piles of leather and metal. He looked up when she entered. "Margaret send you?" "Said you needed help." "Margaret worries too much." But he didn't refuse when Elena started sorting through bridles, checking each one for wear. They worked in silence for several minutes before Cormac said, "You settling in all right?" "Fine." "Ranch hands giving you trouble?" "No." "But?" Elena glanced at him. Cormac had the kind of face that made lying seem pointless. "I'm not used to people being decent without wanting something back. That's a hard way to live. It's kept me alive." Cormac was quiet, examining a bridle with a cracked strap. Then, "Mr. Hale doesn't bring people here, not to stay. You're the first in 15 years. Elena's hand stilled on the leather she was holding. "Why 15 years? That's when he bought this place. Built it up from nothing. Before that," Cormac hesitated. "Not my story to tell, but he had reasons for shutting everyone out. Good reasons, probably, or ones that seemed good at the time." "What changed?" "Don't know. Maybe you could ask him." Elena almost laughed. "We barely speak. We eat at opposite ends of that table, say good morning, say good night. That's it. Give it time." "Time for what?" Cormac hung the damaged bridle on a hook. "For both of you to remember how to be around people. Neither of you is very good at it right now." The observation stung because it was true. That evening, Elena found Thomas near the bunkhouse and apologized. The kid looked confused but accepted it with an awkward nod. She walked back to the main house feeling slightly less terrible, which wasn't much but was something. Dinner was the same as always. Long table, 2 people, acres of silence between them. Gideon ate mechanically, focused on something that wasn't the food. Elena pushed beef around her plate and wondered if 3 months was going to feel like 3 years. "How's the work?" Gideon asked suddenly. She looked up, startled. "Fine? Margaret treating you all right?" "She's good, fair." "And the hands?" "They're fine." Elena paused. "Why?" Gideon set down his fork. "Because you've been here over a week, and I haven't asked. Seemed like something I should ask." "You don't have to make conversation if you don't want to." "I know." "Then why are you?" He was quiet for a moment. "Because sitting in silence every night feels stupid when we agreed to, I don't know, not do this." "Do what?" "Pretend we're strangers." Gideon's voice had an edge of frustration. "You're working here, living here. I thought we were past the gate at least." Elena felt something tight in her chest loosen slightly. "I thought you wanted distance." "I thought I did too." He picked up his fork again, then set it back down. "Turns out, it's harder than I expected." "What is?" "Having someone here and still being alone." The honesty of it caught her off guard. Elena found herself saying, "It's harder for me too, being around people again. I spent 2 years keeping everyone at arm's length. Now I'm here and I don't know how to—" She trailed off, searching for words. "How to just be normal. I haven't been normal in 15 years, so we're even." Something close to a smile crossed Elena's face. "We're a mess, aren't we?" "Completely." The admission hung there, raw and surprisingly comfortable. They finished dinner with slightly less silence between them. And when Elena said goodnight, Gideon actually responded with more than a nod. It was a small thing, but small things, Elena was learning, sometimes mattered more than big ones. The second week brought weather that couldn't decide what it wanted to be. Snow one day, clear the next, then freezing rain that turned everything into a death trap. Work slowed. The ranch hands focused on maintenance, fixing what winter had broken, preparing for what would break next. Elena learned the rhythms of the place. How Cormac took his coffee black and scalding. How Margaret hummed when she kneaded bread. How Gideon checked the horses every morning regardless of weather, spending time with each one like they were the only reliable company he had. She also learned that the town, such as it was, had opinions about her presence at Iron Ridge Ranch. It came through Margaret, who'd gone into town for supplies and returned tight-lipped and angry. "What happened?" Elena asked when Margaret slammed the kitchen door hard enough to rattle the walls. "People talking nonsense, that's what. About me. About you, about Mr. Hale, about things that aren't their damn business." Margaret started unpacking supplies with more force than necessary. "Claire Dennison asked if you were another one of those desperate women chasing his money. I told her you were working here same as anyone, and she laughed. Said everyone knows what working means when a man takes in a woman alone." Elena felt her stomach drop. "What did you say?" "I told her she had a filthy mind and should be ashamed. Then I bought my supplies and left before I said something worse." Margaret turned to her. "It's not true, Elena. You know that. I know that. Anyone with eyes can see there's nothing improper happening here. But people don't care about truth. They care about stories." Elena sat down heavily. "I should leave." "Absolutely not." "Margaret, no, you've done nothing wrong. Mr. Hale's done nothing wrong. You're not running because Clara Dennison and her circle of gossips have nothing better to do than invent scandals." Margaret's voice was fierce. "You stay. Let them talk. Truth wins eventually." "In my experience, it doesn't." "Then your experience is about to change." Elena wanted to believe her. But that night at dinner, when she told Gideon about the gossip, his face went cold in a way that made her nervous. "What people say in town doesn't matter," he said flatly. "It matters if it damages your reputation. My reputation was damaged long before you arrived. This changes nothing. Gideon, if you're thinking about leaving because of gossip, don't." His voice was hard. "I don't make decisions based on what small-minded people think, and I'm not starting now. This isn't about what you think, it's about what they think." Same answer. Elena set down her fork. You're not hearing me. I've been the subject of gossip before. I know how it spreads, how it grows. People will start saying things, inventing details, and eventually it won't matter what the truth is. You'll be the man who took in a woman of questionable character, and I'll be the woman who what? Worked for a living? Accepted honest employment? Gideon's eyes flashed. If people want to make that into something ugly, that's their sickness, not ours. But it will affect you. I don't care. You should. I don't. He stood abruptly. I stopped caring what people thought about me a long time ago. I'm not going to start again because Clara Dennison needs something to talk about over tea. He left the table before Elena could respond. She sat alone in the dining room, listening to his footsteps fade down the hall. Margaret came in to clear plates and gave her a knowing look. He's right, you know, Margaret said quietly. He really doesn't care what people think. Why not? Because the people whose opinions mattered to him already made their judgments years ago. Everyone else is just noise. Margaret paused. You want to know about him. You should ask him, not me. He doesn't talk about it. Have you tried asking? Elena hadn't, because asking meant admitting she wanted to know, and wanting to know meant caring, and caring felt dangerous. But that night, unable to sleep, she found herself thinking about the man 2 doors down who'd built a fortune and a fortress, and still looked lonely every time she saw him. About why someone would work so hard to succeed and then lock himself away from enjoying it. The next morning, she decided to stop wondering and start asking. She found Gideon in the barn again, checking on a mare that had gone lame. He was crouched beside the horse, examining her leg with careful hands. He didn't look up when Elena approached. She'll be fine, he said. Just needs rest. Can I ask you something? Depends what it is. Elena leaned against the stall door. Why did you really reject all those families, the ones who came courting? Gideon's hand stilled on the horse's leg. I told you, I wasn't interested. That's not an answer, that's an excuse. He stood slowly, wiping his hands on a rag. What do you want me to say, Elena? The truth. The truth is, I learned young that people lie. They say they care about you, but they care about what you have. They smile and make promises and then walk away when you're no longer useful. His voice was matter of fact, reciting a lesson memorized long ago. So when wealthy families started showing up here with their daughters, I knew what they wanted. My money, my land, my connections, not me. How do you know? You never gave any of them a chance. I didn't need to. I've seen that particular play before. I knew how it ended. Elena crossed her arms. That sounds like fear pretending to be wisdom. Gideon's jaw tightened. You don't know what you're talking about. Don't I? You're so convinced everyone wants something from you that you never let anyone get close enough to prove you wrong. That's not protection, Gideon. That's prison. I'm not having this conversation. Why not? Because it's none of your business. He moved past her toward the barn door. You made it my business when you asked me to stay, Elena said to his back. When you said you were tired of being alone. You can't have it both ways, wanting company, but refusing to let anyone actually know you. Gideon stopped in the doorway. For a long moment he stood there, silhouetted against white sky. Then he turned. When I was 27, I met a woman, Catherine. She was smart, beautiful, everything I thought I wanted. We courted for 6 months. I proposed. She accepted. His voice was completely flat, like he was reading someone else's story. A week before the wedding, I found out her father's business was bankrupt. The whole courtship had been arranged. She was marrying me to save her family from ruin. When I confronted her, she didn't even bother lying. Just said I should be grateful. At least I'd get a beautiful wife out of it. Elena felt something twist in her chest. Gideon, I called off the wedding, became the villain who broke a young woman's heart and ruined her reputation. Her family spread rumors, said I dishonored her. Other families took sides. By the time the dust settled, I'd learned a very clear lesson about what people value. He looked at her directly. So yes, I rejected every family that came here, because I knew what they wanted, and I wasn't going to go through that again. The silence that followed felt heavy. I'm sorry that happened to you, Elena said quietly. That's terrible, but Gideon, that was 15 years ago. You've let one woman's betrayal define every relationship since. It wasn't just her, it was everyone, her family, her friends, the whole community. They all knew. They all helped her lie. And when the truth came out, none of them cared. They cared about money and reputation and keeping their social standing intact. His voice went harder. So forgive me if I don't trust people's intentions. I understand that. I do. But at some point you have to decide, are you going to let what happened control the rest of your life, or are you going to try again? Why? So I can get hurt again? Maybe. Or maybe you'll find something real. Elena moved closer. You think you're the only one who got betrayed? My husband told me he loved me while he was breaking my ribs. I spent 7 years learning that the person who's supposed to protect you can be the most dangerous person in your life. So I get it, Gideon. I understand being afraid to trust, but I'm trying anyway. Because the alternative is living like this. She gestured around them, surrounded by walls and calling it safety. Gideon stared at her. You're trying. Why do you think I'm still here? I could have left a dozen times, but I'm staying because for the first time in years, I'm somewhere that doesn't feel like I have to earn every breath. And that's terrifying, but it's also... She searched for the word. It's also possible, and I forgot what possible felt like. Something shifted in his expression, not softening, but a crack in the armor. What if I don't know how? How to what? Try. Trust. Any of it. What if I've forgotten? Then we'll figure it out together. Elena held his gaze. You asked me once what I wanted. I want the same thing you do, to stop being so afraid all the time. Maybe we can help each other with that. Gideon was quiet for so long she thought he'd refuse. Then, no promises. I'm not asking for promises, just honesty. I can do that. Then start with this. Do you want me to stay? Not as an employee, as whatever this is. The question hung between them, dangerous and necessary. Yes, Gideon said finally. I want you to stay. Why? Because you're the first person in 15 years who doesn't look at me and see a bank account. You see me. And that's... He stopped, searching for words. That's something I didn't know I needed until you showed up at my gate. Elena felt her chest tighten. I see you because you let me. You could have kept your walls up. You didn't. I tried. Didn't work. Good. They stood there in the barn. Two people who'd been alone so long they'd forgotten how to be anything else, trying to remember. It wasn't romantic. It wasn't smooth. It was awkward and uncertain and felt like standing on ice that might crack at any moment. But it was honest. And after years of lies and pretense, honesty felt revolutionary. The gossip got worse. By the third week, it had spread beyond Clara Dennison's tea circle. Ranch hands from neighboring properties started making comments when they passed Iron Ridge land. Someone in town, no one would say who, started a rumor that Gideon had paid Elena to stay. Another rumor claimed she was pregnant. A third insisted they were secretly married and hiding it to avoid scandal. None of it was true. All of it spread anyway. Elena tried to ignore it. Gideon insisted it didn't matter. But Margaret came back from town with tighter lips each time, and Cormac started making sure Elena was never alone when other ranch hands were around. The protection was kind but obvious, which made everything worse. Then Samuel Harding showed up. Harding owned the Triple Creek Ranch 20 miles south. He was wealthy, connected, and engaged to Catherine, the same Catherine who'd tried to marry Gideon 15 years ago. Margaret mentioned this after Harding's carriage pulled up to the house one afternoon in late February. What's he want? Elena asked, watching through the kitchen window as Gideon walked out to meet him. Nothing good? Margaret's face was grim. Those two have hated each other since Gideon called off the wedding. Harding married Catherine 6 months later, and he spent the last 15 years making sure everyone knows he got the prize Gideon threw away. That's petty. That's men with too much money and not enough sense. Elena watched the conversation in the yard. Even from a distance, she could see the tension. Harding gestured broadly, face animated. Gideon stood still, arms crossed, expression blank. Whatever was being said, it wasn't friendly. After 10 minutes, Harding got back in his carriage and left. Gideon stood in the yard for another minute, then turned and walked toward the barn instead of the house. Elena found him there an hour later working on fence repairs that didn't need working on. His movements were sharp, aggressive. She'd seen this before. Men working their anger out on physical tasks rather than admitting they were angry. What did Harding want? She asked. Nothing important. That's a lie. Gideon hammered a nail with more force than necessary. He came to deliver a message from town. Apparently there's concern about my situation. The upstanding families think I'm making a mistake keeping you here. They're worried about my reputation. What did you tell him? I told him my reputation was my concern and he could go to hell. Despite everything, Elena almost smiled. How'd he take that? About as well as you'd expect. Gideon set down the hammer. He also mentioned that if I wanted to rejoin polite society, all I had to do was send you away and court someone appropriate. Catherine knows several suitable women who'd be interested. The words hit like a slap. He came here to tell you to get rid of me. Essentially. What did you say? Gideon looked at her directly. I said no. Just like that? Just like that. His voice was firm. I told him I wasn't interested in polite society 15 years ago, and I'm not interested now. I told him what I do on my property is my business, and I told him that if he came here again uninvited, I'd have Cormac escort him off with a rifle. Elena felt something warm spread through her chest. You threatened him. I made my position clear. That's going to make everything worse, the gossip, the rumors. I know. Gideon, Elena. He turned fully to face her. I know what this costs. I know people are talking. I know it's going to get harder before it gets better. But I'm not sending you away because Samuel Harding and a bunch of people I don't respect think I should. That's not happening. Why not? It would solve everything. It would solve nothing. It would prove to everyone that their opinion matters more than mine, that I'm still the same man who cares what people think, who makes decisions based on fear and reputation instead of what's actually right. He moved closer. I spent 15 years letting that betrayal define me. I'm not doing it anymore. This isn't about Catherine. It's exactly about Catherine, about every person who taught me to trust no one and ask for nothing, about building these walls and then hating myself for living behind them. His voice dropped. You were right. It is prison, and I'm tired of being locked up. Elena felt her throat tighten. What if we fail? What if this, whatever this is, doesn't work? Then we fail. But at least we tried. Gideon's eyes held hers. I'd rather fail trying than succeed at being miserable. The conviction in his voice made her believe him. Okay, she said quietly. Then we face it together. Together. They stood in the barn while wind rattled the walls and horses shifted in their stalls. Outside, winter held Montana in its grip. Inside, two people who'd been frozen for years tried to remember what warmth felt like. It wasn't a declaration of love. It wasn't a promise of forever. It was just two damaged people deciding to stop running from the possibility that maybe, just maybe, they deserved something better than the loneliness they'd accepted as fate. That night, the first fire started. Not literally, though it would come to that eventually, but the metaphorical kind, the kind that spreads through communities faster than flame through dry wood. Someone told someone who told someone else that Gideon had threatened Samuel Harding, that he'd chosen a woman of no family and questionable history over reconciliation with respectable society, that he'd gone mad with isolation and was making decisions that would ruin him. By morning, half the county knew some version of the story. By afternoon, the first business contacts sent a letter dissolving their partnership, citing concerns about Gideon's increasingly erratic behavior and poor judgment. Margaret found him reading the letter in his study, face carved from stone. Mr. Hale. Leave it, Margaret. This is wrong. They can't. They can, and they will. He set the letter down. Where's Elena? Kitchen. Gideon found her washing dishes, working with the focused intensity of someone trying not to think. She looked up when he entered. This is my fault, she said immediately. All of it. If you say you should leave, I'm going to be very disappointed in you. Gideon leaned against the counter. I got a letter. Arthur Simmons is ending our partnership, says he can't be associated with someone of questionable character. Elena's face went pale. How much will you lose? Money I can afford to lose. It's not about the money. Then what? It's about the fact that I'm being punished for choosing you. And that should make me angry, but mostly I'm relieved. She stared at him. Relieved? Yes. Because for 15 years I've done business with people I didn't respect, maintained relationships I didn't want, all to protect a reputation I never cared about. And now it's all falling apart anyway, and I realize I don't miss any of it. He moved closer. They're showing me exactly who they are. I should thank them for the clarity. Gideon, you're losing business. I'm losing associations with people who value appearances over integrity. That's not a loss. His voice was firm. This is going to get worse before it gets better. More letters, more gossip. People will take sides and most of them won't take ours. Can you handle that? Elena thought about every time she'd run, every job she'd left, every place she'd abandoned because staying was too hard. Then she thought about this house, this man, this possibility she'd found at the end of her rope. I can handle it if you can, she said. Then we're agreed. We stay. We face it. We don't apologize for choices we're not ashamed of. I'm not ashamed. Neither am I. They looked at each other across the kitchen, and Elena felt something shift. The decision to stop running, to stand ground, to choose each other over the easier path. It wasn't love yet. Neither of them was ready for that word. But it was commitment. And for two people who'd spent years afraid to commit to anything, that was revolutionary. Outside, storm clouds gathered over Montana. Inside, two people who'd been alone too long prepared to weather what came next. The walls were coming down. And with them, everything they'd built to protect themselves from being hurt again. It was terrifying. It was also the only way forward. The second letter arrived 3 days later, then a third the day after that. By the end of the week, Gideon had lost 2 more business partnerships and received formal notices that he was no longer welcome at the Cattlemen's Association meetings. The message was clear. Choose respectability or choose Elena. He couldn't have both. He chose Elena, every time. But the cost kept climbing, and Elena watched it accumulate like snow against a fence line. Slow at first, then overwhelming. She found him in his study one evening, surrounded by correspondence, face carved from exhaustion. How bad is it? She asked from the doorway. Manageable. He didn't look up from the letter he was reading. That's not what I asked. Gideon set the paper down. 3 partnerships dissolved. 2 suppliers refusing to do business. The bank in town suddenly questioning my credit, which is ridiculous because I have more money than half the people questioning it. His voice was flat, reciting facts. And Samuel Harding sent another message. He's organizing a gathering in town. All the concerned citizens who think I need guidance. A gathering about you? About my choices. My reputation. My future. He picked up another letter, scanned it, tossed it aside. They're planning an intervention, essentially. Want me to appear and explain myself. Elena felt ice settle in her stomach. Are you going? No. Gideon. I said no. He stood, moving to the window. I'm not going to stand in front of people I don't respect and justify decisions they have no right to judge. They want me to apologize for you. I won't do it. Maybe you should. He turned sharply. What? Maybe you should go, face them. Tell them the truth instead of letting rumors fill the silence. Elena moved into the room. Because right now they're inventing their own version of events, and it's only getting worse. The truth won't matter to them. They've already decided what they believe. Some of them might listen, and the ones who don't, at least you'll know you tried. Gideon crossed his arms. You want me to defend you to people who've already convicted you? I want you to defend yourself. Defend the choice you made. Defend the idea that maybe, just maybe, you have the right to live your life without their approval. She held his gaze. You've spent 15 years hiding here. This is your chance to stop hiding. I'm not hiding. I'm protecting what's mine. By letting them control the narrative? By staying silent while they tear you apart? Elena shook her head. That's not protection, Gideon. That's surrender. The words hit him visibly. He turned back to the window, jaw tight. Outside, dusk was falling over frozen land. The ranch stretched out in all directions, his kingdom built on work and will and absolute control. But control was slipping. And maybe, Elena thought, that wasn't entirely a bad thing. If I go, Gideon said slowly, it won't go well. These people aren't interested in understanding. They're interested in being right. Probably, but you'll know you faced them instead of running. I don't run. Then prove it. The challenge hung in the air between them. Gideon stood silent for a long moment, then turned. If I do this, you're coming with me. Elena's breath caught. What? You heard me. If I'm going to stand in front of that town and defend my choices, you're standing there too. No hiding, no protection. We face them together or not at all. The prospect terrified her. Public judgment, hostile faces, questions she didn't want to answer, but she looked at Gideon's face and saw the same fear mirrored there, wrapped in determination. When? She asked. Gathering set for Saturday. 2 days. Then we have 2 days to prepare. There's no preparing for this, Elena. They're going to say terrible things about you, about me, about what they think is happening here. Can you handle that? She thought about Daniel, about the bruises he'd left and the names he'd called her, about the rancher's son who'd tried to corner her in the barn and the father who'd called her a liar, about every time someone had tried to make her feel small and worthless. I've handled worse, she said, and this time I'm not alone. Gideon's expression softened slightly. No, you're not. The next 2 days passed in tense preparation. Margaret tried to talk them out of going. Cormac offered to accompany them, looking grim. Thomas and some of the younger ranch hands asked if they should come along, ready to back their employer even if they didn't fully understand what they were backing him against. Gideon turned down all offers. This is between me and them. No one else needs to be involved. On Friday night, Elena couldn't sleep. She lay in bed listening to the house settle, trying to imagine what Saturday would bring. The accusations, the judgment, the weight of all those eyes. She'd spent 2 years making herself invisible. Tomorrow, she'd be the opposite, examined, discussed, condemned. She was still awake when she heard footsteps in the hall. They stopped outside her door, hesitated, then moved on. A few seconds later, she heard the creak of floorboards near the stairs. Elena got up, wrapped a shawl around her shoulders, and found Gideon standing at the landing window, looking out at darkness. Can't sleep either? She asked quietly. He didn't turn. Wondering if this is a mistake. Going tomorrow? All of it. Asking you to stay, fighting this battle, refusing to just, he gestured vaguely, give them what they want. Elena moved beside him. What do they want? For me to go back to being what I was. The frozen king in his castle. Alone but acceptable. Wealthy but not threatening. His voice was bitter. They could handle me when I was isolated. Now I'm choosing something, someone, over their approval, and that terrifies them. Because if I can do it, maybe others will too. You think that's what this is really about? Partially. The rest is punishment. I rejected their daughters, refused their alliances, built this place without their help. They've wanted me to fail for years. Now they have their excuse. Elena was quiet for a moment. Then, my husband used to say something similar, that people wanted him to fail because he was successful, that everyone was against him. She paused. It was a lie. People weren't against him. They were afraid of him. There's a difference. What's the difference? People who are against you want you to fail. People who are afraid of you want you to stop threatening them. She looked at Gideon directly. You're not threatening anyone, Gideon. You're just refusing to play their game. That scares them because it means the game isn't as important as they thought. He absorbed this. What if I go tomorrow and it changes nothing? What if they still hate me, still refuse to do business, still spread rumors? Then at least you'll know. And you can decide what matters more, their approval or your own peace. I chose my peace when I asked you to stay. Then tomorrow is just making that choice public. Gideon turned from the window to face her. In the dim light, his face looked younger, less guarded. I'm not good at this, at letting people in, at trusting that it won't blow up in my face. I know, I'm not good at it either. But you're trying. So are you. Elena pulled her shawl tighter. That's all we can do, right? Keep trying, even when it's hard, even when we're scared. I'm terrified, Gideon admitted quietly, of tomorrow, of what comes after, of failing you the way I've failed at every relationship I've attempted. You haven't failed me. Not yet, not ever. Elena reached out, hesitated, then took his hand. His fingers were cold. You gave me a place to stop running. You treated me like a person instead of a problem. You stood up to an entire community rather than send me away. That's not failure, Gideon. That's courage. He looked down at their joined hands. It doesn't feel like courage. It feels like jumping off a cliff, and hoping there's water at the bottom. Maybe that's what courage is. They stood together in the dark hallway, holding hands like children afraid of monsters. Except the monsters were real. Reputation, judgment, the crushing weight of other people's opinions, and the only weapon they had against those monsters was each other. "Whatever happens tomorrow," Gideon said, "I want you to know something." "What?" "You were right. When you came to my gate that day and said I was dying alone in this house, you were absolutely right, and I'm grateful you didn't give up when I told you to leave." Elena felt her throat tighten. "I'm grateful you let me stay." "Are you? Even with everything that's happened?" "Especially because of everything that's happened." She squeezed his hand. "For the first time in years, I feel like I matter. Not because I'm useful or convenient, but because someone actually sees me. That's worth fighting for." Gideon pulled her into an embrace. Not romantic, neither of them was ready for that, but desperate. Two people holding on to each other while the world tried to tear them apart. Elena pressed her face against his shoulder and felt him shaking slightly. "We're going to be okay," she said, not sure if she believed it, but needing to say it anyway. "Promise?" "No. But we're going to face it together, and that's better than facing it alone." They stood that way for several minutes, drawing strength from proximity. Then Gideon released her, stepped back, and tried for something resembling composure. "Get some sleep," he said. "Tomorrow's going to be brutal." "You too." "I'll try." Elena returned to her room but didn't sleep. She sat by the window watching stars fade into dawn, preparing herself for what was coming. The judgment. The accusations. The moment when she'd have to stand in front of hostile strangers and defend her right to exist in a space they thought she didn't belong. She'd done it before. She could do it again. This time she wouldn't be alone. Saturday arrived cold and bright. Gideon and Elena dressed carefully. Him in his best suit, her in the one good dress Margaret had altered to fit. They looked like they were attending a funeral. In a way, Elena supposed they were. The funeral of Gideon's old life, the one where he'd been isolated but safe. The gathering was scheduled for 2 o'clock at the town hall. They left Iron Ridge Ranch at noon, taking the carriage instead of horses. The drive took 90 minutes through snow-crusted landscape that looked brittle enough to shatter. Neither of them spoke much. There was nothing left to say that hadn't been said the night before. They were committed now, for better or worse. The town appeared on the horizon like a judgment rendered in wood and stone. Small, neat, prosperous. The kind of place where everyone knew everyone, and strangers were noticed immediately. Elena had been through towns like this before. They looked friendly until you gave them a reason not to be. Gideon guided the carriage down the main street. People stopped to stare. Conversations paused. Elena felt the weight of their attention like physical pressure. "Ignore them," Gideon said quietly, trying. They reached the town hall just before 2. The building was larger than Elena expected. 2 stories of white-painted wood with windows that reflected winter sky. Carriages filled the area around it. Wealthy families come to witness the spectacle. Gideon helped Elena down from their carriage. His hand was steady on her elbow, but she could feel tension radiating from him. They walked toward the entrance together, and Elena had the strange sense of walking toward execution. The hall's main room was packed. Easily 100 people, maybe more, all turned to watch as Gideon and Elena entered. The silence was immediate and total. At the front of the room, Samuel Harding stood beside a woman Elena recognized from Margaret's descriptions, Catherine, Gideon's former fiancée. She was beautiful in a cold way, perfectly dressed, perfectly composed. Her eyes tracked Gideon and Elena with calculating interest. "Mr. Hale," Harding called out, voice carrying across the room. "How good of you to join us, and you've brought your guest." The pause before guest was deliberate, loaded with implication. Elena felt her spine stiffen. "Miss Mercer is here at my invitation," Gideon said clearly. "Same as I'm here at yours. Shall we begin?" Harding gestured to 2 chairs at the front. "Please sit. We have much to discuss." They walked forward through hostile silence. Elena kept her head up, refusing to show fear. Every eye in the room followed them. She recognized some faces. Clara Dennison, the woman who'd started the rumors. The bank manager who'd questioned Gideon's credit. Business owners, ranch proprietors, wealthy families. All of them here to judge. They sat. Harding remained standing, playing to the crowd. Mr. Hale, we've gathered today out of concern, Harding began. Concern for your well-being, your reputation, and your future in this community. Many of us have known you for years. We've watched you build your ranch, establish your success. We respect what you've accomplished. That's kind of you to say, Gideon replied flatly. Now, tell me what you really think. Harding's smile didn't reach his eyes. Very well. We believe you're making a serious mistake. Your association with Miss Mercer has damaged your standing in the community. Business partners are withdrawing. Your reputation is suffering. People are questioning your judgment. Let them question. But why? Why throw away everything you've built for, Harding gestured at Elena, someone no one knows? Someone with no family, no connections, no background anyone can verify? Elena felt heat rise in her face, but Gideon spoke before she could. Because who Elena is matters more than who her family was. Because character isn't inherited, it's earned. And because I'm tired of people who measure worth by bloodlines and bank accounts. A murmur ran through the crowd. Catherine spoke for the first time, her voice honey smooth. Gideon, we understand you've been lonely. Isolation does strange things to judgment, but surely you can see this woman is taking advantage of your vulnerability. She arrived out of nowhere, wormed her way into your home, and now... Now what? Gideon interrupted. Finish that sentence, Catherine. She faltered slightly. Now she's isolating you from the people who care about you. The people who care about me weren't speaking to me until they had something to criticize. Where was this concern when I was alone? Where were all these caring friends when I spent 15 years in that house with no one? His voice rose. You didn't care then. You care now because I made a choice without asking your permission. We care because we can see what you apparently cannot, Harding cut in. This woman is using you. She saw wealth and opportunity and attached herself. You don't know me, Elena said quietly. The room went silent. All eyes turned to her. She hadn't planned to speak, but rage was building in her chest and she couldn't contain it anymore. You don't know anything about me, she continued, louder now. You don't know where I came from or what I survived. You don't know that I came to Iron Ridge Ranch with nothing because I had nothing, and I stayed because for the first time in my life someone treated me like a human being instead of property. She stood facing the crowd. You want to judge me? Fine. Judge me for being poor. Judge me for having no family name. Judge me for accepting honest work from a man who offered it. But don't pretend you know my intentions when you've never bothered to ask what they are. Balm chielem balmat. Catherine's expression hardened. And what are your intentions, Miss Mercer? Are you planning to marry Mr. Hale and secure his fortune? I'm planning to work for my wages and sleep in a bed that doesn't have bugs in it and eat regular meals, Elena shot back. If that seems mercenary to you, it says more about your privilege than my character. How dare you? How dare I what? Tell the truth? Point out that all of you are so focused on money and status that you can't imagine someone wanting anything else. Elena's voice shook but held steady. My husband beat me for 7 years. When he died, his family took everything and threw me out. I've worked every job no one else wanted, slept in rooms I couldn't afford, and gone hungry more times than I can count. So when Gideon Hale offered me fair wages and a safe place to sleep, yes, I took it, and I'm not ashamed of that. The silence following her words was absolute. Elena saw shock on many faces, discomfort on others. A few women looked down, unwilling to meet her eyes. Gideon stood beside her. Anyone else want to question her character? Harding recovered first. Mr. Hale, we sympathize with Miss Mercer's difficult circumstances. But that doesn't change the fact that this arrangement appears improper. You're an unmarried man housing an unmarried woman. Surely you can see how that looks. I see how it looks to people determined to see scandal where there isn't any, Gideon replied. Elena works for me. She's employed the same as Cormac or Margaret or any other ranch hand. The only difference is she's a woman, and apparently that makes her presence inherently suspicious. It makes it vulnerable to misinterpretation, said a voice from the crowd, an older man Elena didn't recognize. And whether you like it or not, Hale, reputation matters in business. Then I'll do business with people who value more than reputation. There won't be many left, Harding warned. You're isolating yourself, burning bridges. Good. Some bridges deserve burning, Gideon turned to address the entire room. I came here today because you demanded it, because I thought I owed you an explanation for my choices. But I was wrong. I don't owe you anything. My life, my home, my decisions, they're mine, not yours to approve or condemn. You're being foolish, Catherine said coldly, throwing away respect and standing for a woman who means nothing. She means everything. The words dropped into the room like stones into water. Even Gideon looked surprised he'd said them. Elena felt her heart stop. What? Catherine's face went pale. Gideon continued, voice steady now. Elena means everything because she's the first person in 15 years who didn't want something from me. She came to my gate in a snowstorm and asked for nothing except a conversation. She's worked harder than anyone I've employed. She's faced your gossip and your judgment without flinching, and she's made me remember what it's like to care about something beyond money and land, and the walls I built to keep everyone out. He turned to Elena. You asked why I'm doing this. Why I'm fighting so hard for someone I barely know. That's why. Because you're the best thing that's happened to me in years, and I'll be damned if I let these people take that away. Elena couldn't speak, couldn't move. The entire room was staring, but she only saw Gideon, saw the raw honesty in his face, the vulnerability of the admission. Gideon, she managed finally, I know. We said no promises, no declarations, but that was before all this. He gestured at the crowd. Before I realized what you've cost me, and what you've given me that's worth so much more. This is insanity, Harding declared. You're destroying yourself for a woman you've known 2 months, 3 months. And I've known most of you for 15 years, and none of you ever made me feel half as alive as she does. Gideon's voice rang clear. So yes, Samuel, yes, Catherine, yes, everyone in this room who came to witness my humiliation or force me back in line. I'm choosing her. I'm choosing the possibility of something real over the certainty of your approval, and I don't care what it costs. The room erupted, people shouting, arguing, some standing to leave in disgust. Catherine looked like she'd been slapped. Harding's face went purple with rage. Through it all, Elena stood frozen, staring at Gideon. We should go, he said quietly. She nodded, unable to find words. They walked out through chaos, people shouting questions and accusations. Someone called Elena a whore. Someone else called Gideon a fool. The voices blended into noise as they pushed through to the door, into sunlight, into air that felt suddenly easier to breathe. At their carriage, Gideon helped Elena up, then climbed beside her. He took the reins with shaking hands. That went well, he said dryly. Elena started laughing. She couldn't help it. The absurdity of everything, the hostile crowd, the dramatic declarations, the utter disaster they'd just walked out of. She laughed until tears ran down her face, until Gideon started laughing too, until they were both sitting in the carriage gasping for air. We're completely ruined, Elena managed between laughs. Thoroughly. No one will speak to us. Probably not. Your business is destroyed. Likely. And you just told 100 people I mean everything to you. Gideon's laughter faded. He looked at her seriously. I meant that. Elena's laughter died too. I know. Does it scare you? Terrifies me. Good, because it terrifies me too. He took her hand. But I meant every word. Whatever happens now, we face it together. Agreed? Elena looked at their joined hands, then at his face. Saw the fear there, and the determination, and something else she wasn't quite ready to name. Agreed, she said. They drove back to Iron Ridge Ranch in silence, leaving the town and its judgment behind. The sun was setting when they arrived, painting everything gold and red. The ranch looked the same as always, solid, permanent, home. Margaret met them at the door, took one look at their faces, and asked no questions. Just ushered them inside, fed them soup, and left them alone. That night, Elena and Gideon sat in his study, processing what had happened. The bridge burning, the public declaration, the complete severing from the community they'd both half belonged to. No going back now, Gideon said. No. Regrets? Elena thought about it honestly, about the safety of isolation versus the danger of connection, about running versus standing still, about protecting herself versus opening up to the possibility of being hurt again. No, she said finally, no regrets. Even though I just made everything worse? You didn't make anything worse. You made everything honest. She moved closer. And honesty is what I came here looking for in the first place. Gideon pulled her against him, and they sat together as darkness fell over Montana. Tomorrow would bring consequences. Lost business, continued gossip, the reality of having chosen each other over everything else. But tonight they had this: two people who'd been frozen for years, finally beginning to thaw. Outside, wind rattled the windows. Inside, the fire crackled warmth. And somewhere between the cold and the heat, between isolation and connection, Gideon and Elena stopped being two separate people guarding against hurt and became something else entirely. Something that looked, against all odds and expectations, like the beginning of love. The fallout came faster than either of them expected. By Monday morning, 3 more business contacts had sent letters dissolving their agreements. The bank manager, who'd been friendly for years, suddenly found reasons why certain transactions needed additional review. The general store in town sent word through a nervous delivery boy that they could no longer extend credit to Iron Ridge Ranch, cash only, and preferably sent with someone other than Mr. Hale or Miss Mercer. Gideon read each letter at his desk, face expressionless, then filed them away with the others. Elena watched from the doorway, anxiety building in her chest. "How bad?" she asked. "Getting worse." He closed the filing drawer. "But manageable. I have enough capital to weather this. The cattle are healthy. Spring sales will keep us solvent, even if half the territory refuses to deal with me." "That's not what I'm worried about." "Then what?" Elena came into the room. "I'm worried about you, about what this is costing you that can't be measured in money." Gideon leaned back in his chair. "You mean my reputation? My standing in the community I never wanted to be part of anyway? I mean the relationships you're burning, the doors that are closing, the life you built here that's being dismantled piece by piece." She sat across from him. "I need to know you're not going to wake up in 6 months and regret this. Regret me." The vulnerability in her voice made him look at her directly. "Elena, because if you're going to regret it, I need to know now, before I let myself believe this is real, before I—" She stopped, not ready to finish that sentence. "Before you what?" "Before I fall," she said quietly. "I'm trying so hard not to, Gideon, trying to protect myself the way I've always protected myself. But when you stood up in that town hall and said I meant everything, when you chose me over all of them, something inside me just—" She pressed a hand to her chest. "Something broke. Or opened. I don't know which." Gideon came around the desk and knelt in front of her chair. "Look at me." She did. His eyes were the same winter-pale blue they'd always been, but warmer somehow, less guarded. "I'm not going to regret you," he said firmly. "Not in 6 months. Not in 6 years. What I regret is waiting 15 years to let someone pass these walls. What I regret is all the time I wasted being afraid when I could have been living." He took her hands. "You didn't break anything, Elena. You opened something I'd nailed shut. And yes, it's terrifying. But it's also the best thing that's happened to me. Even with everything falling apart, nothing's falling apart. It's being stripped down to what actually matters. And what matters is here. You, me, this ranch, the people who've stood by us. The rest is just noise." Elena wanted to believe him, but doubt was a hard habit to break. What if it gets worse? What if they come after the ranch itself? What if— "Then we'll deal with it." Gideon squeezed her hands. "Together. That's what we agreed to, remember? Whatever comes, we face it together." "I'm not used to together. I'm used to alone." "So am I. We'll figure it out." She searched his face, looking for cracks in the conviction. Found none. And maybe that was what finally let her start believing, not that everything would be fine, but that they'd face whatever came as a unit instead of 2 separate people weathering separate storms. "Okay," she said. "Together." He kissed her forehead, gentle and brief, then returned to his desk. It wasn't a romantic gesture. They were still too uncertain for romance, but it felt significant. A promise made physical. Margaret appeared in the doorway carrying fresh coffee. She looked between them, read something in the air, and smiled slightly. "Mail came," she said, setting the pot on Gideon's desk. "More letters. One from the railroad company." Gideon tensed. The railroad contract was one of his largest remaining business relationships. If that fell through— He opened the letter, read it quickly, and his expression darkened. They're terminating the contract, he said flatly, citing concerns about my ability to fulfill obligations given my current circumstances. He tossed the letter aside. That's Mitchell's doing. He's on their board. Probably pushed this through as a favor to Harding. Can they do that? Elena asked. They can do whatever they want. Contracts have clauses for termination. They're exercising one. Gideon's jaw tightened. That was 30% of my spring income. Margaret made a noise of disgust. Bunch of cowards. Can't handle a man making his own choices. They can handle it fine, they just don't want to. Gideon stood, restless energy filling him. They want me to come crawling back, apologize, send Elena away, prove I've learned my lesson. Then maybe they'll forgive me and let me back into their good graces. Are you going to? Elena asked, even though she knew the answer. No. The word was absolute. I'm going to find other buyers, other contracts, other ways to move cattle and make money. This territory isn't the only market in America. That will take time, Margaret pointed out. And money. I have both, barely, but enough. He looked at Elena. This is going to be a lean year, maybe 2. Can you handle that? I've handled lean my whole life. Not like this, not with everyone watching, hoping we fail, waiting for the moment we crack and give them the satisfaction of being right. His voice was serious. They're going to push until something breaks, until I break or you break or we break apart. That's their game. Then we don't break, Elena said simply. We bend, we adapt, but we don't break. Gideon almost smiled. You make it sound easy. It won't be easy, but it's possible. That's all we need. The words became their mantra over the following weeks as the isolation intensified. More letters arrived, more contracts dissolved, more doors closed. The town made it clear that Iron Ridge Ranch was no longer welcome in polite commerce. Supplies had to be ordered from distant sources at higher prices. Sales had to be negotiated with buyers 2 territories over. Every transaction became complicated, expensive, difficult. But Gideon refused to bend, and Elena stood beside him, watching him work with a determination she recognized because she carried the same thing inside herself. The refusal to be broken by circumstance, the insistence on surviving when survival seemed unlikely. Cormac proved invaluable, using old contacts and friendships to find alternative supply chains. Margaret stretched every dollar until it screamed. The ranch hands, seeing their employer under siege, worked harder than required, loyal in ways money couldn't buy. And slowly, painfully, a new normal emerged, harder than before. Leaner, but sustainable. Elena found herself taking on more responsibility. She managed household accounts, negotiated with distant suppliers, organized the chaos of sudden business changes. Gideon trusted her with decisions that would have been his alone before, and she discovered she was good at it, better than good. Years of surviving on scraps had taught her how to stretch resources and find value where others saw nothing. One evening in late March, she was working on accounts in the study when Gideon came in from a day spent mending fences in bitter wind. He looked exhausted, face raw from cold, hands stiff with chill. Coffee? She offered. Please. She poured from the pot Margaret kept perpetually warm and watched him wrap his hands around the cup, trying to thaw. He'd been working harder than anyone, pushing himself to prove something. To whom, Elena wasn't sure. Himself, maybe. Or the people who thought he'd crumble. Accounts balance? He asked. Barely, but yes. She showed him the ledger. If spring sales go well, we'll make it through summer with enough reserve for winter preparation. If they don't, they will. Gideon, you can't know that. I can hope it. That's enough for now. He set down his cup. Elena, I need to tell you something. The seriousness in his voice made her nervous. What? I've been lying to you, not about important things, but about how I'm handling this. He gestured vaguely at everything, the ranch, the isolation, the struggle. I keep saying it's fine, that I expected it, that nothing they do can touch me. But the truth is, I'm scared. Not of failing financially. I can survive that. I'm scared of failing you. Elena set down her pen. How could you fail me? By dragging you into this mess. By making your life harder instead of better. By being so determined to prove I don't need anyone's approval that I forget to ask if you're okay with the cost. He looked at her directly. Are you okay with this? She considered the question honestly. Life at Iron Ridge Ranch was harder now than it had been 2 months ago. The work was more demanding, the future less certain, the weight of outside judgment constant. But she also had regular meals, a warm bed, and something she'd never had before. Someone who asked if she was okay and actually waited for the answer. "I'm okay," she said. Not because it's easy, but because it matters. This place matters. You matter. And I'd rather struggle here than have an easy life somewhere that feels empty. "You're sure?" "I'm sure." She moved around the desk to stand in front of him. "Gideon, I spent 7 years with a man who never once asked what I wanted, who never cared if I was okay or scared or hurting. You ask me every day. You check. You care. That means more than money or reputation or anything else they're trying to take from us." He pulled her down onto his lap, wrapped his arms around her, and held on like she was the only solid thing in a world turning liquid. Elena felt his heart beating against her back, fast and hard. "I don't know what I'm doing," he admitted quietly. "With you, with this, with any of it. I've been alone so long I've forgotten how to be anything else." "Then we'll learn together, make mistakes together, figure it out as we go." "What if I can't give you what you need?" "What do you think I need?" "I don't know. Safety, security, a future that doesn't involve being hated by everyone within 50 miles. Elena turned in his arms to face him. "I need honesty. I need someone who doesn't hit me when they're angry or lie to me when they're scared. I need to be seen as a person instead of property. Everything else we can figure out." "That seems like a low bar." "You'd be surprised how many men can't clear it." She touched his face, rough with stubble and cold from wind. "You clear it, Gideon, every day. So stop worrying about failing me and focus on what we're building here." "What are we building?" "I don't know yet, but it's ours, and that's enough." He kissed her then, properly this time. Not the brief, careful kiss of two people afraid to want too much, but something deeper, something that acknowledged the feeling they'd been dancing around for months. Elena kissed him back, tasting coffee and cold air and possibility. When they broke apart, Gideon rested his forehead against hers. "I'm falling in love with you, just so you know." Elena's breath caught. "That's terrifying." "I know. I'm falling too, have been for a while now." "How long?" She thought about it. "Maybe since that first morning when you gave me a blanket and told Cormac to stable my horse. Maybe earlier, I don't know. But it's happening and I can't stop it, and that scares me more than anything that's happened since." "Because it could hurt?" "Because it already matters too much. If this fails, if we fail, if something goes wrong," her voice cracked. "I don't think I could survive losing this." Gideon pulled her close again. "Then we don't fail. We fight. We adapt. We do whatever it takes to make this work." "You make it sound simple." "It's not simple, but it's worth it. You're worth it." Elena buried her face in his shoulder, letting herself feel the fear and the hope and everything in between. Outside, night fell over frozen Montana. Inside, two people who'd been alone too long held on to each other and tried to believe that love was possible even in the coldest season. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. In early April, a man named James Sullivan arrived at Iron Ridge Ranch driving a wagon loaded with supplies. He was middle-aged, weathered, and unfamiliar. Cormac met him at the gate with the usual wariness they'd developed toward strangers. "State your business," Cormac called. "Looking for Gideon Hale. Got a delivery and a proposition." Gideon emerged from the barn, Elena beside him. They'd learned to face visitors together now, presenting a united front. "I'm Hale. What's this about?" Sullivan climbed down from his wagon. "James Sullivan. I run a freight company out of Helena. Heard about your troubles with the railroad." "Word travels fast. In this business, it has to." Sullivan looked between Gideon and Elena with frank assessment. "Also heard you're being squeezed by every two-bit businessman between here and the border because you had the audacity to live your life without asking permission." Gideon's eyes narrowed. "And you care because I've been where you are. 10 years ago, I married a woman my family disapproved of. They cut me off, tried to ruin my business, spread rumors that would make your current situation look friendly." Sullivan smiled grimly. "I survived by finding people who didn't give a damn about society's opinions and just wanted to do good business. Figured maybe you could use the same." "What are you offering?" Freight services at competitive rates. I can move your cattle to markets the railroad won't. Connect you with buyers who care about quality over gossip. I've got contacts in Wyoming, Colorado, even some connections back east. He gestured at his wagon. Brought supplies as a goodwill gesture. If you're interested, we can talk terms. If not, I'll unload these and be on my way. Gideon and Elena exchanged glances. This felt too easy, too convenient. But desperation made strange allies. Why would you do this? Elena asked. What's in it for you? Sullivan looked at her directly. Besides profit, satisfaction. I like seeing people thumb their noses at the gatekeepers. Plus, my wife insisted. She heard about a woman being torn apart by gossips for the crime of being poor and working for wages, and she said if I didn't at least try to help, she'd have some words for me I wouldn't enjoy hearing. Despite everything, Elena almost smiled. Your wife sounds formidable. You have no idea. So what do you say, Hale? Want to talk business, or should I move along? Gideon studied the man for a long moment, weighing options. Then he extended his hand. Let's talk. They spent the afternoon in Gideon's study, reviewing Sullivan's connections and discussing rates. By evening, they'd hammered out an agreement. Sullivan would handle freight and market connections in exchange for a percentage of sales and first contract on future business. It wasn't charity. Sullivan would profit well if things worked out. But it was fair. More importantly, it was hope. You've got good instincts, Sullivan said as he prepared to leave. Both of you. This ranch is solid. You'll weather this storm fine if you stick together. We intend to, Gideon replied. Sullivan looked at Elena. My wife wants to meet you. Says any woman who can survive the whole territory ganging up on her deserves female friendship. If you're ever in Helena, look us up. Thank you, Elena said, genuinely touched. Tell her I appreciate it. After Sullivan left, Gideon and Elena stood in the yard watching his wagon disappear into dusk. The air had lost some of winter's bite. Spring was finally coming, however slowly. That was unexpected, Elena said. The best things usually are. Gideon pulled her close. We're going to make it through this. Starting to believe it. Only starting? Old habits. I've spent so long expecting the worst that expecting anything better feels dangerous. She leaned into him. But I'm trying. That's all I ask. They went inside together, and that night over dinner, the conversation felt different, less strained, more hopeful. Margaret noticed it too, humming as she cleared plates, satisfied with something she saw between them. Later, in the study, Elena worked on correspondence while Gideon reviewed Sullivan's proposed contracts. The silence between them was comfortable now, no longer charged with uncertainty. Elena, Gideon said suddenly. When I told that town hall you meant everything, I wasn't exaggerating. You know that, right? She looked up. I know. And when I said I was falling in love with you, you've already fallen. I know that too. How? Because I pay attention. Because I see the way you look at me when you think I'm not watching. Because you've reorganized your entire life around making room for me in it. She set down her pen. The question isn't whether you love me, Gideon. The question is what we do about it. What do you want to do about it? Elena stood and moved to where he sat. She'd been thinking about this for weeks, turning it over in her mind, weighing fear against desire. I want to stop pretending this is temporary, she said. Stop pretending I'm just an employee who happens to live here. Stop pretending we're not building something real. What are we building? A life. A partnership. Something neither of us thought we'd ever have. She took a breath. I want to stay, Gideon. Not for 3 months. Not until the trial period ends. I want to stay permanently. Build this ranch with you. Face whatever comes next together, if you'll have me. Gideon stood, pulling her close. If I'll have you? Elena, I've been trying to figure out how to ask you to stay without sounding desperate. You're the best thing in my life. The only thing that makes this isolation bearable. If you left now, I don't know what I'd do. Then I won't leave. Promise? I promise. As long as you want me here, I'll stay. I'll always want you here. He kissed her, slow and deep, pouring everything he couldn't say into the gesture. When they broke apart, both were breathing hard. Marry me. Elena froze. What? Marry me. Not because of gossip or scandal or proving anything to anyone. Marry me because I love you and I want to build this life with you officially, permanently. No more questions about impropriety or arrangements, just us, legally bound, facing the world together. Gideon, we don't have to. I know we don't have to. I want to. I want you to have my name, my legal protection, my everything. I want the world to know you're not an employee or a guest or a temporary situation. You're my partner, my future, my choice. He cupped her face. So marry me, Elena, please. She searched his eyes, looking for doubt or obligation, found only sincerity and love and determination. This wasn't a proposal born from external pressure. It was born from genuine feeling, from months of learning each other, from choosing each other repeatedly until the choice became inevitable. Yes, she said. Yes, I'll marry you. Gideon's face transformed. The careful control he usually maintained cracked completely, showing pure joy underneath. He picked her up and spun her around, laughing, and Elena found herself laughing too. When he set her down, they were both grinning like fools. When? He asked. Soon, before I lose my nerve or the world finds another way to complicate things. Tomorrow? Tomorrow seems fast. Next week? Next week seems terrifying. Elena took his hands. But yes, next week. We'll do it quietly. Just us, Margaret, Cormac, whoever else from the ranch wants to witness. No performance, no trying to prove anything, just a promise made and kept. That's perfect. They told Margaret the next morning. She cried, actually cried, and immediately started planning. Not a grand wedding, but something simple and meaningful. A dress could be altered, a small ceremony in the ranch house, food prepared by people who cared about them. It wouldn't be fancy, but it would be theirs. Cormac congratulated them with his usual gruff restraint. But Elena saw approval in his eyes. The ranch hands reacted with a mixture of surprise and satisfaction. They'd been watching this unfold for months and were pleased to see it reach a logical conclusion. The news reached town within days, carried by the same gossip network that had condemned them. The reaction was predictable. Shock, outrage, accusations that Elena had trapped Gideon into marriage, predictions that it would end in disaster. But this time, Gideon and Elena didn't care. They'd stopped letting other people's opinions dictate their actions. The wedding would happen regardless of what anyone thought. Samuel Harding sent a letter calling the marriage a mockery. Catherine sent nothing, which somehow felt worse. Other letters arrived, some hostile, some surprisingly supportive from people who admired their defiance even if they disagreed with the circumstances. Gideon burned the hostile ones and kept the supportive ones to show Elena when she needed reminding that not everyone was against them. The week passed in a blur of preparation and nervous anticipation. Elena altered her one good dress with Margaret's help, turning it into something almost bridal. Gideon cleaned up the main room of the house, making space for the small gathering. They arranged for a magistrate from a neighboring county, someone who didn't care about local gossip and just wanted to perform a legal ceremony. The night before the wedding, Elena couldn't sleep. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, mind racing with everything that had led to this moment. The desperate ride to Iron Ridge Ranch, the conversation at the gate, the decision to stay, the slow building of trust, the town hall confrontation, the falling in love despite every reason not to. A soft knock at her door made her sit up. Come in. Gideon entered, looking as restless as she felt. Can't sleep either. Too much thinking. Want company? She nodded. He sat on the edge of her bed, maintaining proper distance even though tomorrow they'd be married. Having doubts? He asked. No, just wondering how I got here. How we got here. Through stubbornness, mostly, he smiled, and luck, and refusing to give up even when everything pointed toward giving up being the smart choice. Do you think we're crazy? Probably, but I'd rather be crazy with you than sane and alone. Elena took his hand. Tomorrow changes everything. Tomorrow changes the paperwork, what we are to each other. That changed months ago. Tomorrow just makes it official. I'm scared. Of what? That I'll wake up and you'll realize you made a mistake. That the man who spent 15 years protecting himself from being hurt will remember why he built those walls and put them back up. Her voice dropped to a whisper. That I'll lose this. Gideon pulled her into his arms. You're not going to lose this. Elena, listen to me. I spent 15 years building walls because I thought they'd keep me safe. All they did was keep me alone. You came along and knocked them down, and yes, it's terrifying. Yes, I'm vulnerable in ways I haven't been since I was young and stupid, but I wouldn't trade that for safety. I wouldn't trade you for anything. Promise? I promise. Tomorrow, and every day after, you're mine and I'm yours. That's not changing. They sat together in the dark, holding on to each other, until eventually exhaustion won and they both dozed. When dawn came, they woke tangled together in Elena's bed, fully clothed and completely innocent, but holding each other like the world might try to pry them apart. Ready? Gideon asked. Elena thought about everything that had brought her to this moment. The years of survival, the loneliness, the fear, the desperate hope that maybe, somewhere, there was a place she could belong. Ready, she said. Outside, spring sun melted the last of winter's snow. Inside Iron Ridge Ranch, two people who'd been frozen by circumstance and fear prepared to face the future together. Imperfectly, uncertainly, but together. And for two people who'd spent so long alone, together was everything. The wedding ceremony took place at noon in the main room of the ranch house, sunlight streaming through windows that looked out over land Gideon had built from nothing. The space had been cleared of its usual furniture, replaced with chairs borrowed from various rooms. Margaret had arranged wildflowers, the first brave blooms of spring, in whatever containers she could find. It wasn't elegant, but it was honest. Elena stood in her altered dress, hands shaking slightly as Margaret fixed the last pin in her hair. The older woman's eyes were already wet with tears she refused to acknowledge. "You look beautiful," Margaret said quietly. "I look nervous." "That too, but mostly beautiful." Margaret squeezed her shoulder. "He's a good man, Elena. Stubborn as hell and emotionally constipated, but good. You're making the right choice." "I hope so. You know so. I've seen how you two look at each other. That's not doubt. That's terror that it might not last, which is different." Margaret handed her a small bouquet of the wildflowers. "Every good thing in life comes with the fear of losing it. That's how you know it matters." Elena took the flowers, their stems rough against her palms. Through the door, she could hear voices gathering: Cormac, the ranch hands, a few people who'd traveled from neighboring properties despite the scandal. Not many, but enough. Witnesses to the fact that two broken people had decided to try being whole together. "Ready?" Margaret asked. Elena took a breath. "Ready." They walked down the stairs together. At the bottom, Gideon waited beside the magistrate, a lean man with kind eyes who'd agreed to perform the ceremony without judgment. Gideon wore his best suit, the one he'd worn to the town hall confrontation, but he'd shaved and his hair was combed back neatly. He looked terrified and determined in equal measure. When he saw Elena descending the stairs, his expression transformed. The fear didn't leave, but something else joined it. Wonder, maybe, or disbelief that this was actually happening. Elena reached the bottom, and Margaret stepped aside. Gideon took Elena's hand, his grip tight enough to hurt slightly. She squeezed back, reassuring him that she was real. This was real. They were doing this. The magistrate cleared his throat. "Shall we begin?" The ceremony was brief. No elaborate vows, no performance for an audience. Just the legal words binding two lives together, spoken clearly and without embellishment. When the magistrate asked if Gideon took Elena as his wife, his "I do" rang out firm and certain. When Elena's turn came, her voice shook, but the words were clear. "I do." "Then by the power vested in me by the territory of Montana, I pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride." Gideon pulled Elena close and kissed her, and the small gathering erupted in applause. It wasn't a fairy tale moment. Elena's hands were still shaking and Gideon's eyes were suspiciously bright. But it was theirs, this moment, this promise, this beginning. When they broke apart, Margaret was openly crying. Cormac looked pleased in his gruff way. The ranch hands cheered, clearly relieved that the months of tension had resolved into something definitive. And Elena felt something inside her chest unclench for the first time in years. The constant readiness to run, to protect herself, to expect the worst. It didn't disappear completely. Old survival instincts died hard, but it eased. The celebration that followed was modest but genuine. Margaret had prepared a meal that stretched their supplies but tasted like abundance. Someone produced whiskey. Toasts were made, some eloquent, most awkward, all sincere. Thomas, the young ranch hand Elena had snapped at months ago, stood and said simply, "To Mr. and Mrs. Hale, May you prove all those bastards in town wrong. It got the biggest cheer of the night. As evening fell, guests began departing. Cormac shook Gideon's hand with something approaching emotion. Margaret hugged Elena hard enough to crack ribs, whispering, "You take care of each other now." Finally, the house was quiet. Gideon and Elena stood in the main room, now husband and wife, surrounded by the remnants of celebration. "Well," Gideon said, "we did it." "We did. Any regrets yet?" "Ask me in 50 years. He laughed, the sound unguarded and genuinely happy. "Fair enough." They cleaned up together, working in comfortable silence, and Elena marveled at how domestic it felt. How normal. 6 months ago, she'd been alone and desperate, sleeping in rented rooms and wondering if she'd ever find a place that felt like home. Now she was married, standing in a house that bore her name legally, beside a man who'd chosen her over everything else. It felt impossible. It felt inevitable. It felt terrifying and wonderful and real. That night they lay together in Gideon's bed, their bed now, wrapped around each other in the dark. Neither spoke. There was nothing left to say that hadn't been said in the vows, in the months of choosing each other, in every moment they'd stood together against a world that wanted them apart. But the peace didn't last long. 3 days after the wedding, a lawyer arrived from town with documents. Not congratulations. A lawsuit. Samuel Harding, backed by several other prominent families, was suing Gideon for breach of contract and defamation of character. The specifics were vague and likely baseless, but the intent was clear. Drain Gideon's resources through legal fees, force him to defend himself, make the cost of defiance unbearable. Gideon read the documents in his study while Elena watched, fury building in her chest. "They can't do this," she said. "They can. They are." He set the papers down. "It's harassment dressed up as legal action. The suit will probably be dismissed eventually, but that doesn't matter. The point is to make me bleed money and time fighting it." "How much will it cost?" "More than we have easily available. I'll need to liquidate some assets, probably sell land or cattle at unfavorable prices." His voice was flat, emotionless. "They've been waiting for this, waiting for me to make it official with you so they could strike." Elena felt something cold settle in her stomach. "This is my fault. If we hadn't married—" "Don't!" Gideon's voice was sharp. "Don't you dare blame yourself. This is their choice, their cruelty, not your fault. But they're doing it because of me. They're doing it because I refuse to let them control my life. You're the excuse, not the reason." He stood, pacing. "I knew this might happen. I should have prepared better, moved assets, protected us legally before the wedding. We can fight this. With what? I've already lost most of my business contacts. If I liquidate assets to pay lawyers, I weaken the ranch. If I don't fight, they win by default, and the judgment could take everything." He slammed his hand on the desk. "They've got me trapped." Elena had seen this before. Different circumstances, different players, but the same game. Powerful people using the system to crush those who challenged them. She'd watched it happen to families on the frontier, seen good people destroyed by those with more money and connections. But she'd also learned something in those years of watching. Sometimes the only way to win an unfair game was to stop playing by the rules everyone expected. "What if we don't fight them in court?" she said slowly. Gideon looked at her. "What? What if we take this public? Not in town, where they control the narrative, but beyond. To newspapers in Helena, to territorial authorities, to anyone who'll listen." Elena's mind was racing now, connecting pieces. "Sullivan has contacts. He said his wife wanted to meet me. What if we tell our story, not as a scandal, but as what it actually is? Wealthy families trying to destroy a man for marrying someone they deemed unacceptable. Harassment disguised as business. The use of legal systems to enforce social control. That could backfire, make things worse. Could it? We're already social pariahs here. We've already lost the business relationships. What more can they take if we expose what they're doing?" She moved closer to him. "Gideon, these people have power because everyone's too afraid to challenge them publicly. But if we name what they're doing, if we make them defend their actions in a broader arena where they don't control everything, maybe we shift the game." He was quiet, thinking. Then, "It's risky. Very risky. Everything we've done has been risky. This could ruin us completely. If it fails, we're no worse off than we are now. But if it works, if we can get enough attention on what they're doing, they might back down. Or at least other people might see what's happening and offer support. Elena took his hands. We can't win their game, Gideon, so let's change the game. A slow smile spread across his face. You're brilliant, and possibly insane. I learned from the best. They spent the next week crafting their strategy. Elena wrote letters, to newspapers, to territorial representatives, to anyone she thought might care about the story of frontier families using wealth to crush dissent. She didn't embellish or exaggerate, just laid out the facts. Gideon's business partnerships dissolved after he married her. The lawsuit filed days after their wedding. The systematic isolation and economic pressure designed to force compliance. Gideon contacted Sullivan, who immediately offered to help. His wife Sarah turned out to be exactly as formidable as promised. She knew editors, activists, people who made careers out of exposing the abuses of the wealthy and powerful. Within days, she'd gotten their story to 3 major newspapers. The response was faster than either Elena or Gideon anticipated. The first article appeared in the Helena Independent 2 weeks after they sent the letters. It was titled, Frontier Feudalism: How Montana's Elite Punish Those Who Defy Social Convention. It laid out Gideon and Elena's story alongside similar tales from across the territory. People who'd been economically destroyed for marrying the wrong person, choosing the wrong business partner, refusing to bow to established power structures. The article made Samuel Harding look like exactly what he was, a petty tyrant using wealth and connections to enforce his will. It made the lawsuit look like what it was, harassment. And it made Gideon and Elena look like what they were, 2 people trying to live their lives despite a system designed to prevent it. The reaction was immediate and divided. Some papers defended Harding and the other families, calling the article sensationalized and accusing Gideon of playing victim. But others picked up the story, adding their own examples, building a broader narrative about frontier justice and the abuse of power. Within a month, the conversation had shifted from Gideon Hale married inappropriately to should wealthy families be allowed to destroy people economically for personal reasons. It wasn't a complete victory. Many people still sided with Harding. The lawsuit was still pending, but the pressure had reversed. Now Harding and his allies were the ones being examined, questioned, asked to justify their actions in public forums where wealth alone didn't guarantee control. And slowly, grudgingly, some of them began to retreat. The first to withdraw was Arthur Simmons, who dissolved his business partnership with Gideon months earlier. He sent a quiet letter offering to reinstate the agreement, citing misunderstandings and hasty decisions. Gideon refused, but the offer itself was significant, a crack in the united front. Others followed, not apologies exactly, but olive branches. Business owners who'd refused to deal with Iron Ridge Ranch suddenly found reasons to reconsider. The bank manager who'd questioned Gideon's credit mysteriously stopped questioning it. Small concessions, carefully worded to avoid admitting fault, but concessions nonetheless. The lawsuit dragged on, but Harding's lawyers started making noises about settlement. They'd expected a quick victory over an isolated target. Instead, they were facing a public relations disaster and mounting pressure from people who thought using lawsuits to enforce social conformity was wrong, regardless of who was involved. By early summer, the settlement offer arrived. Harding would drop the suit entirely if Gideon agreed to drop the public campaign and sign a mutual non-disparagement agreement. It was an attempt to save face, neither side admitting fault, both sides moving on. Gideon and Elena discussed it in their study, now truly their shared space. Elena's accounting ledgers sat beside Gideon's business papers. Her books shared shelves with his. The room had become a testament to their merged lives. If we accept it's over, Gideon said, we can move on, rebuild, stop fighting. If we accept they get to pretend none of this happened, Elena countered. They get to save face while we're still the troublemakers who caused all this fuss. Does that matter? We know the truth. The people who matter know the truth. Elena thought about it. About the woman she'd been 6 months ago, desperate and alone. About the choice to come to this ranch, to stay, to fight for a life she'd thought impossible. About what mattered now that she had that life. It matters less than I thought it would, she said finally. I wanted them to admit they were wrong, but I think what I really wanted was for us to not be crushed by them. And we weren't. We survived. We fought back. We're still here." She looked at Gideon. "If taking this settlement means we can stop fighting and start living, I'm okay with that." "You're sure?" "I'm sure. Let them think they saved face. We know what really happened. That's enough." Gideon accepted the settlement. The lawsuit was dismissed. The non-disparagement agreement was signed. Legally, it was as if the whole ugly conflict had never happened. But everyone knew it had, and everyone knew who'd backed down. The summer that followed was the first peaceful season either of them had known in years. Sullivan's freight connections proved valuable, opening markets Gideon had never accessed before. The cattle sales went better than expected. Money that had been tight began to loosen. The ranch not only survived, but started to thrive again. More importantly, they thrived. Gideon and Elena settled into marriage with the same determination they'd brought to everything else. Imperfectly, but genuinely. They fought sometimes, usually about small things blown large by stress or exhaustion. They had days where the weight of everything they'd been through made them snap at each other. They had moments where old fears resurfaced and one or both would retreat into protective silence. But they also had moments of profound peace. Mornings working side by side. Evenings where conversation flowed easy. Nights wrapped around each other, grateful for warmth and presence and the knowledge that they'd chosen well. Margaret watched them with satisfaction, occasionally muttering that it was about damn time someone broke through Gideon's walls. Cormac approved in his quiet way, noting that the boss seemed lighter somehow, less burdened. The ranch hands adjusted to having a woman who was genuinely part of the operation, not just decoration or scandal. And slowly, the community began to shift. It started with small gestures. A rancher from a neighboring property stopping by to discuss cattle prices, treating Elena with respect rather than suspicion. A woman in town nodding to her on the rare occasions Elena visited for supplies. Nothing dramatic, but the hostility eased into something closer to wary acceptance. Some people never came around. Clara Dennison still spread rumors. Samuel Harding made sure everyone knew he'd been vindicated by the settlement. Catherine reportedly told anyone who'd listen that Gideon had made the biggest mistake of his life. But their opinions mattered less than they once had, because Gideon and Elena had learned something important in those brutal months. You couldn't control what people thought or said. You could only control how you responded. And they'd chosen to respond by living well, building something real, and refusing to let other people's limitations define their possibilities. By autumn, when the first snow began to fall again, Elena stood at the same window where Gideon had watched her arrive almost a year ago. The view looked different now, less forbidding, more like home. She heard footsteps behind her and felt Gideon's arms wrap around her waist. "Thinking about something?" he asked. "Thinking about how much has changed, how different things are now from when I rode up to that gate. Regrets?" "None. You?" "Not a single one." He rested his chin on her shoulder. "Though I do regret being such a stubborn ass for 15 years before you showed up. You were protecting yourself. Can't fault you for that. Still wasted a lot of time. Maybe. Or maybe everything happened exactly when it needed to. If I'd come here 5 years ago, would you have let me in? Would I have been ready to stay?" Elena turned in his arms to face him. "We found each other when we were both ready to be found. That's not wasted time, that's timing." Gideon kissed her forehead. "When did you get so wise?" "I've always been wise. You were just too stubborn to notice." He laughed, the sound free and unguarded. It still surprised her sometimes, hearing him laugh. The man who'd been the frozen king of Montana, trapped in isolation of his own making, had learned to thaw. Learned to let someone in. Learned that vulnerability wasn't weakness. It was the only real strength there was. They stood together watching snow fall over land they'd fought to keep, over a life they'd fought to build. The ranch stretched out around them, solid and permanent. Not perfect. They still struggled sometimes, still worried about money and weather and the 1,000 challenges that came with frontier living. But they faced those challenges together, and that made all the difference. Margaret called them for dinner, her voice echoing through the house that no longer felt too large. They'd filled it not with furniture or guests, but with presence, with the daily accumulation of shared moments, with the understanding that home wasn't a place. It was what you built with someone who saw you completely and chose you anyway. That winter was long and hard, as Montana winters always were. But inside Iron Ridge Ranch, there was warmth. Not just from fires and thick walls, but from the knowledge that two people who'd been alone too long had found each other at exactly the right moment. When both were desperate enough to risk the walls they'd built. When both were brave enough to believe that maybe, just maybe, love was possible even for the wounded and wary. They still had hard days. Days when Gideon retreated into old patterns of emotional distance and Elena had to coax him back out. Days when Elena's old fears resurfaced and she had to remember that this man wasn't her first husband, that safety was possible. Days when the weight of their shared history, the judgment, the isolation, the fight, felt overwhelming. But they had more good days. Days filled with work and laughter and the quiet satisfaction of building something lasting. Days when they looked at each other and marveled that they'd found this, not despite their brokenness, but because of it. Because they understood what it meant to survive, what it cost to trust again, what it took to choose hope over safety. Spring came eventually, as it always did. The snow melted, the land turned green, and new calves were born in pastures that had weathered another brutal season. Gideon and Elena stood at the fence line one morning in early April, watching the herd graze, and Gideon said something that had been building in him for months. "I need to tell you something about my father." Elena waited. Gideon rarely spoke about his past beyond the Catherine betrayal. She'd learned not to push. He died alone in a house like this one. Big, expensive, empty. He'd built a fortune through cattle and land, same as me. And he spent his last years isolated because he trusted no one, let no one in, convinced himself that wealth was enough. Gideon's voice was quiet. "When I found him, I was 25, hadn't seen him in months. He'd been dead 3 days before anyone noticed. That's what terrified me. Not dying, but dying alone like that. Becoming him." Elena took his hand. "For 15 years, I told myself I was different. I had friends, employees, business contacts. I wasn't isolated like he was. But I was lying to myself. I was exactly like him, rich and alone, and slowly dying in a house too big for one person." He looked at her. "You saved me from that. From becoming the thing I feared most." "You saved yourself," Elena corrected gently. "You let me in. That was your choice." "Because you gave me a reason to. Because you showed up at my gate and refused to leave until I saw you. Really saw you." He pulled her close. "I spent so long thinking strength meant being invulnerable. Turns out real strength is letting yourself be vulnerable with the right person." "Took me a while to learn that too," Elena admitted. "I thought strength meant surviving alone, never needing anyone, never giving anyone the power to hurt me." She rested her head against his chest, listening to his heartbeat. "But I was just as isolated as you were, just as afraid. We were both imprisoned by our own protection. And now we're free. Scared sometimes, vulnerable sometimes, but free." They stood that way for a long while. Two people who'd learned the hard way that walls built to keep pain out also keep everything good out too. That real safety wasn't found in isolation, but in connection. That the only way to heal from wounds was to risk being wounded again, carefully, with someone who'd earned the trust, but risk nonetheless. The story spread eventually, as stories do. The tale of the frozen king and the desperate woman who knocked on his gate. People embellished it, made it more romantic than it had been, smoothed over the rough parts. Some said it was a fairy tale. Others said it was foolishness. Most just said it was interesting and moved on to the next scandal. But for Elena and Gideon, it wasn't a story. It was their life, earned through pain and courage, and the willingness to try when trying seemed impossible. It was the daily choice to keep choosing each other, even when it would be easier to retreat. It was the recognition that perfect didn't exist, but real did, and real was enough. Years later, when people asked Elena what made her ride 70 miles through a snowstorm to knock on a stranger's gate, she could never quite explain it. Desperation, maybe. Loneliness. The instinct that told her this particular stranger might understand. But mostly, it was hope. The kind of hope that people who've survived terrible things carry like a secret. The belief that somewhere, somehow, there might be a place where the weight could be set down. She'd found that place. Not because it was easy or perfect or without struggle, but because she'd been brave enough to knock, and Gideon had been brave enough to answer. And when people asked Gideon why he'd let her in, why he'd broken 15 years of isolation for a woman he didn't know, he'd say simply, "Because I was tired of being alone." and she was tired of running, and sometimes that's enough. It was enough. For them, it was more than enough. The ranch thrived, not overnight, not without effort, but steadily. Gideon's gamble on Sullivan's freight connections paid off. New partnerships formed with people who valued business over gossip. The isolation that had seemed so total began to ease as they proved that their marriage wasn't the disaster everyone predicted. And on quiet evenings when work was done and the house was warm, Gideon and Elena would sit together in the study that had become their sanctuary. Sometimes they talked. Sometimes they worked in comfortable silence. Sometimes they just existed in the same space, grateful for company. These were the moments that mattered. Not the dramatic confrontations or the public declarations, but the quiet accumulation of ordinary moments that built a life. The knowing when the other needed space. The ability to be fully present. The trust that came from choosing each other repeatedly until the choice became automatic. What they'd built wasn't perfect, but it was real. And it was theirs. And it had been worth every moment of fear and struggle and pain. Because in the end, the frozen king had learned to thaw. And the woman who'd been running had learned to stay. And together they'd created something neither could have built alone. A home, a partnership, a future. And on cold Montana nights when wind rattled the windows, they'd lie together in the dark and remember that once, not so long ago, they'd both been alone. They'd both been afraid. They'd both been convinced that hope was dangerous and trust was impossible. They'd been wrong. Hope was dangerous, but also essential. Trust was impossible, until it wasn't. And love was the hardest, scariest thing either of them had ever done. It was also the best. Outside, winter eventually gave way to spring, which gave way to summer, which returned to winter again. The seasons turned as they always had, indifferent to human struggle. But inside Iron Ridge Ranch, two people who'd learned to stop being afraid of being seen lived and worked and loved and fought and made up and kept choosing each other. Every single day. And that, more than any dramatic gesture or public declaration, was what love actually looked like. Not perfect. Not easy. Just two imperfect people deciding that being imperfect together was better than being alone. It was enough. It was everything. And the frozen king of Montana, who'd once stood at his window watching the world from behind his walls, now stood at that same window with his wife beside him, looking out, not at isolation, but at possibility. The gates were open, the walls were down, and finally, after so many years of winter, spring had come.